I was 3 exits from home on Interstate 35 when my phone rang, the caller ID lighting up with a name I'd saved 9 years earlier and never had a reason to worry about, Dolores. "Mrs. Ellis," she said, and her voice was shaking so badly I almost didn't recognize it. "Don't go home. Please, not yet." I eased my foot off the gas, my pulse already climbing before I understood why. "Dolores, what's wrong? Are you hurt? Is something on fire?" No. I'm fine. But you can't come home right now. Please, pull over somewhere safe." I signaled and took the next exit, my hands tightening on the wheel in that particular way they used to before a difficult briefing, when I knew bad news was coming but not yet its shape. I pulled into the gravel lot of a shuttered feed store, put the car in park, and let the engine idle beneath a sign advertising alfalfa hay that no one had bought in years. "Talk to me," I said, keeping my voice level out of habit more than composure. "I came back for my umbrella," Dolores said. "I forgot it under the stairs this morning. I only meant to run in and grab it." "And?" A long pause, filled with something that sounded like her trying to breathe evenly. "Major Ellis is home. He's not alone." I sat very still. 14 years in the army teaches you a few things whether you want them or not, and one of them is how to receive bad news without letting your face or your voice give away the fact that your whole world has just tilted sideways. Stay calm. Gather information. Do not react until you understand what you're reacting to. "Who's with him?" I asked. "I don't know her name. I've never seen her before in my life." Dolores's voice cracked. "Mrs. Ellis, I don't think this is the first time. There were 2 coffee cups already washed and sitting in the drying rack when I got there this morning, before Marcus was even supposed to be home." I closed my eyes and let that sit for a moment. Marcus had told me at breakfast that he had a full slate of client meetings downtown and wouldn't be back until dinner. I had left the house an hour after him for what was supposed to be an all-day training review at Fort Hood, one that had been cancelled at the last minute due to a scheduling conflict nobody had bothered to warn me about until I was already 20 minutes into the drive. A small, unremarkable stroke of administrative bad luck. It was about to detonate my entire life. "Where are you now?" I asked. "In my car, 2 streets over, by the Whitmore's house. I left through the side door by the garage. I didn't want them to hear me, and I didn't want them to know I'd seen." "Good. Stay there. Don't go back inside for any reason." I pulled up the security app on my phone with hands that were no longer entirely steady. Marcus and I had installed cameras 2 years earlier, after a string of break-ins 2 streets down had made the whole neighborhood nervous, and because I traveled for training rotations often enough that I liked being able to check on the house from anywhere in the country. I had never once imagined this was what I would eventually use them for. The living room feed loaded slowly, buffering for what felt like an eternity before resolving into a picture I would spend the rest of my life wishing I could unsee. Marcus was on the couch, laughing at something, his arm draped comfortably around a woman I had never met. She was holding a coffee mug I recognized immediately, a gag gift from my unit that read "World's Okayest Logistics Officer" in faded block letters, something I'd left on the kitchen counter because I liked how ridiculous it was. She was drinking my coffee out of my mug in my kitchen, wearing a cardigan that looked suspiciously like one of mine, folded over the back of a couch I had picked out myself at a furniture outlet 6 years earlier. I didn't cry. I want to say that clearly, because everyone always assumes crying comes first. It didn't. I simply watched, the way I had been trained to watch anything before I moved on it. Confirm the facts. Preserve the evidence. Do not act until you understand the whole picture. I called Dolores back. "How long have you known, or suspected?" She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Months," she finally admitted. I told myself I was imagining things. A lipstick in the guest bathroom that wasn't yours. Dishes in the sink that didn't match what the 2 of you ate the night before, according to what you told me when I asked. I didn't want to be the person who broke apart your marriage over a feeling I couldn't prove. "You're not breaking anything," I said, and I meant it more than I expected to. He already did that. You just told me the truth before I drove straight into finding out some other, worse way. I sat in that gravel lot for nearly 20 minutes, replaying the footage twice, screen recording each pass and forwarding the clips to my personal email in case anything happened to my phone. My hands finally steadied once I had something concrete to do. Training does that for you. It gives your hands a job so your heart doesn't have to run the whole show. Then I didn't drive home. I drove to my sister Catherine's apartment across town, and I sat at her kitchen table while she made 2 cups of tea neither of us touched, and I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a divorce attorney a fellow officer had used 2 years earlier and had described, memorably, as terrifyingly organized. The second was to my company commander, letting him know I might need to take a few personal days, without yet being able to explain why. That first night, sleep never really arrived. I lay on Catherine's pull-out couch listening to the refrigerator hum in the next room, running the footage back through my mind on a loop I couldn't switch off no matter how many times I told myself to stop. Marcus's laugh. The woman's hand resting on his knee, easy and unhurried in a way that only comes from familiarity. The mug. The cardigan. I kept returning to small, stupid details. Had he bought her flowers with the money from our anniversary trip we'd cancelled last spring because he said work was too busy? Had that trip ever actually been about work at all? Around 3 in the morning I gave up trying to sleep and sat at Catherine's kitchen table with a legal pad of my own, writing down every strange or unexplained thing from the past year that I'd brushed aside without a second thought. The credit card statement that arrived a week late one month, which Marcus explained away as a postal delay. The Saturday afternoon he'd disappeared for a work emergency, and come home smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't wear. The new gym membership he'd mentioned almost in passing, one I never once saw a receipt for, at a facility clear across town from either of our offices. None of it, on its own, had ever seemed like enough to question. That, I would come to understand over the following weeks, was exactly the point. A single strange Tuesday means nothing. It's only once you start lining up a year's worth of strange Tuesdays side by side that the shape of the thing finally becomes visible. Catherine sat across from me while I finished the second call, her hands wrapped around a mug she never drank from, watching my face like she was waiting for the moment I'd finally fall apart so she'd know what to do with me. "You're not going to cry, are you?" she said. It wasn't really a question. "Not yet," I admitted. "Maybe not at all." "I don't know." "That's allowed too," she said. I stayed at her apartment that night, sleeping poorly on her pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling and running the footage back through my head on a loop I couldn't shut off. Marcus's laugh. The woman's hand on his arm, easy and familiar in a way that told me this wasn't the first afternoon they'd spent like that. The mug. The cardigan. The 2 cups already washed and drying before Marcus was supposed to have even been home. By 7 the next morning I was in the parking lot of a law office in downtown Austin, waiting for it to open, because I hadn't been able to sleep past 5 and driving felt better than lying still. The attorney's name was Linda Brooks, and her receptionist told me apologetically that Ms. Brooks was booked solid for the day. "It's urgent," I said. "What kind of urgent?" I looked down at my phone, at the paused frame of Marcus's arm around a stranger's shoulders. "My husband doesn't know I've already seen something he thinks is still a secret." There was a pause, and then the receptionist came back on the line. "Ms. Brooks can see you at 2. Linda's office overlooked a stretch of green along the river, the kind of view that probably cost extra and was worth every cent of it if it kept her clients from staring at blank walls while their lives fell apart in front of them. She was somewhere in her early 60s, silver-streaked hair pulled back neatly, and she carried herself with the unhurried confidence of someone who had watched every possible version of this story unfold and had stopped being surprised by any of them years ago. She listened without interrupting while I played her the footage on my phone. When Marcus's arms settled around the woman's shoulders, Linda's face didn't change. When I mentioned the 2 cups already washed that morning, she made a small note on a legal pad. When I got to the part about the cardigan, she looked up. "You're certain that's yours?" "I bought it at the same store 2 years ago." "I still have the receipt somewhere." "Good," she said. "Start keeping receipts for everything from this point forward. Even things that feel insignificant. Why does the cardigan matter more than the affair?" Linda set her pen down. Because the affair is awound. The cardigan, the mug, the 2 coffee cups already in the rack, those are patterns. Patterns are what win cases. Feelings don't hold up in front of a judge nearly as well as timelines do. She handed me a yellow legal pad before I left. I want you to think like an investigator for the next few weeks. Not like a wife. That phrase landed harder than almost anything else that week. Not like a wife. As if the version of me that had spent 9 years building a life with this man needed to step aside so a colder, more useful version could take over. I told myself it was practical advice, not an insult. Some nights that was easier to believe than others. Linda's first instruction was simple: don't confront him yet. If he suspects you know, she said, he'll start hiding things faster than we can find them. Right now, he doesn't think you're paying attention. That's the only advantage you have. Don't give it away. So for the next 2 weeks I lived 2 different lives at once. At home, I smiled over dinner, listened to Marcus complain about difficult clients and Texas traffic, folded his laundry, and let him take my hand during our evening ritual of watching whatever crime procedural happened to be airing that week. I let him believe nothing had changed, because Linda was right. The version of me that knew everything was more useful staying quiet than storming in demanding answers I hadn't yet fully documented. During the day, I built a paper trail. I logged into our joint investment account for the first time in months and found something I hadn't expected: nearly $78,000 missing, not withdrawn all at once, but siphoned out gradually over almost a year. $8,000 here. $12,000 there. Each transaction carried a bland label: portfolio rebalance, asset transfer, fee adjustment, the kind of language designed to make a bored spouse's eyes slide right past it during a routine account check. If I hadn't already been looking for trouble, I never would have noticed any of it. I took screenshots of every page before logging out, my hands steady this time, my mind already several steps ahead into the kind of methodical calm that used to serve me well during equipment audits and supply chain crises. Then I sat at our kitchen table listening to Marcus humming in the shower upstairs, an hour after he'd kissed my forehead and asked whether I wanted grilled chicken for dinner. I'd told him that sounded nice. The words had tasted like cardboard on the way out. The next morning I drove back to Austin before my shift, and Linda already had a legal assistant waiting with a checklist. Today we collect facts, Linda said. Feelings can wait. It sounded cold when she said it. It helped anyway. We spent 3 hours combing through every account I could remember: checking, savings, a small retirement fund, a modest brokerage account we'd opened years earlier with the vague intention of eventually funding our niece's college education. Linda frowned deeper with every document. Has your husband always handled the finances mostly on his own? Yes, I admitted. He was always better with numbers than I was, and I traveled enough for training that it made sense for him to take the lead. And you trusted that completely? I did. She nodded without judgment. That's more common than you'd think. It's also exactly the arrangement that makes this kind of thing easiest to hide. Then she turned her monitor toward me. She'd pulled county property records showing 3 properties tied to Marcus's name: our home, a small rental property I vaguely remembered him mentioning as an investment 2 years back, and a modest cabin outside a small town I'd never heard of. We don't own a cabin, I said. Linda pointed at the ownership history. You didn't. Your husband did, as of 8 months ago. As of 6 weeks ago, he doesn't anymore. She scrolled down. He transferred it to his mother for $1. I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that surprised even me. You don't sell a lake house for $1. No, Linda agreed. You hide one. That afternoon I met Dolores at a small cafe not far from her apartment. She looked like she hadn't slept much better than I had, dark circles under her eyes, her hands wrapped tightly around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. I keep wondering if I should have said something sooner, she said. Months ago, even. I noticed things and told myself it wasn't my place. You told me the moment you were certain, I said. That's different from staying silent forever. She looked down at the table. I've worked in that house for 9 years. I told myself I worked for both of you. That it wasn't my business to interfere. You didn't work for both of us, I said. You worked for me. I'm the one who hired you, the one who signed your checks, the one who trusted you with a key to my home. None of that changes because of what you saw. Her eyes filled, and for a moment neither of us said anything else. It was the first time in days I'd felt something other than a cold, methodical anger, something closer to gratitude. Without her phone call, I would still be at home right now, folding his laundry, believing every word he told me, walking further and further into a version of my own life that had already stopped being true months earlier. Can I ask you something else? I said. Did he ever say anything to you about me? About us? Dolores hesitated, turning her cup slowly on the table. Once, she said. Maybe 2 months ago. He mentioned you'd been distant lately, that the two of you were going through a rough patch because of your schedule. I didn't think much of it at the time. Marriages go through rough patches. I told him I hoped things got easier. What did he say to that? He said he was doing everything he could to keep things together. She looked down. I believed him, Mrs. Ellis. I'm sorry. I actually felt sorry for him when he said it. I reached across the table and took her hand. That's not something you need to apologize for. He was good at that. I believed him for 9 years. You believed him for one conversation. She managed a small, watery laugh at that, and something in the tension between us eased just slightly. I've seen her before, Dolores admitted quietly. The woman. Not many times. Maybe 5 or 6, over the last several months. I told myself she was a client, the way Marcus always described anyone I happened to see at the house when you weren't home. You never saw anything you thought was inappropriate before today? No. Never anything I could point to and say for certain. Just enough small things that never quite added up. She looked up at me. Today, there was no introduction. No excuse offered. They already knew each other far too well for that. That detail hurt more than I expected. It wasn't a single mistake, a single terrible afternoon. It was a routine. A pattern that had been running quietly alongside our marriage for the better part of a year, hidden in plain sight by a man who had apparently gotten very good at explaining away anything that might have given him away. By late summer, Linda had scheduled Marcus's deposition, not the trial itself, just sworn testimony taken before both attorneys, but every word of it would matter later. Her instruction to me was simple. Say as little as possible. Let the documents do the talking. I can do that. I know you can. That's exactly why I'm counting on it. The deposition took place in a plain conference room downtown, fluorescent lights humming overhead, a court reporter seated quietly in the corner with her fingers already resting on the stenotype machine. Marcus walked in wearing the navy sport coat I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary, smiling at me like we were meeting for lunch instead of the formal beginning of the end of our marriage. Rachel, he said. You look good. I've been sleeping better, I said, and something in his expression flickered for just a second before the smile came back. His attorney began with routine questions: marriage, employment, income, property, and Marcus answered smoothly, clearly rehearsed. Then Linda stood. Mr. Ellis, when did your relationship with the woman identified in the security footage begin? He barely blinked. I don't know who you mean. Linda slid a printed photograph across the table without comment. It showed Marcus and the woman walking hand in hand outside a restaurant, the timestamp from 8 months earlier. She's a business acquaintance, he said. Linda placed a second photograph beside it. A dinner. A third. A weekend trip. A fourth, taken from the security footage itself, time-stamped and unmistakable. His attorney rubbed his forehead. Marcus shifted in his seat. I may have spent time with her socially. While telling her your divorce was already finalized? Linda asked. I never said that. Without another word, Linda pressed a button on a small recorder. A woman's voice, the woman from the footage, it turned out her name was Danielle, played through the speaker, admitting that Marcus had told her the marriage was over months earlier, that he'd claimed we hadn't shared a bedroom in years, that he still wore his wedding ring only because it made things easier with clients. The room went very quiet. His attorney slowly closed his legal pad. The questions continued. Had he transferred ownership of the lake property? Yes, he admitted, to his mother, as a gift. Had marital funds been used to renovate it? He didn't recall. Linda handed him a stack of invoices totaling more than $90,000, each one bearing his electronic signature. I don't recall, he said again. Then came the question none of us expected the way it landed. Mr. Ellis, Linda asked, how many romantic relationships were you involved in over the past year? He sighed, as though the question itself were an imposition. My private life isn't relevant here. It is today. A long pause. 1. At that exact moment, the conference room door opened, and Danielle walked in. Marcus's face went completely white. I was asked to wait outside until now, she said calmly, looking at him for a long moment before she spoke again. Which one of us were you actually planning to marry? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Danielle looked at me, something like an apology in her expression, before turning back to him. You told me she was gone. And last month I found out you'd proposed to someone else entirely. His attorney's pen dropped onto the table. Even the court reporter paused, just for a second, before her fingers resumed their steady rhythm. Marcus finally managed a single syllable, and then nothing else. For the first time since any of this had started, the man who always had a smooth explanation for everything had simply run out of them. In the days after the deposition, Marcus tried, briefly, to salvage things at home, or at least to salvage the version of things he still believed I hadn't fully seen. He came home one evening with a bouquet of grocery store flowers and an apology so vague it could have applied to almost anything. I know things have been strange between us, he said, setting the flowers on the counter. I want you to know I'm still committed to fixing this. I looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time in weeks I let myself feel something close to pity, not for what he'd done, but for how thoroughly he still seemed to believe his own performance. Fixing what, exactly? I asked. Us. Whatever's been off lately. Marcus, I said quietly, I've seen the footage. I've seen the transfers. I met Danielle 3 weeks ago in my attorney's office. Whatever color remained in his face drained out of it in an instant. He set down the wine glass he'd been holding with a hand that wasn't quite steady. Rachel. Don't, I said. Not tonight. Save it for the deposition. I picked up my keys and drove back to Catherine's, and that was the last real conversation we had as husband and wife that didn't happen through attorneys. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, I learned things about the story Marcus had been quietly constructing that were, in some ways, harder to sit with than the affair itself. One evening I drove to the small church we'd attended for years, not for a service, just to sit in the quiet for a few minutes and try to settle my thoughts. Pastor Allen happened to walk through the fellowship hall while I was there. Rachel, he said warmly, before noticing my expression. Everything all right? I almost said yes. Instead I asked, has Marcus ever talked to you about our marriage? His smile faltered. What did he say? I probably shouldn't. It's important, I told him. He sighed. He told me military life had changed you. That you were never really home anymore, not in any way that mattered. He asked us to pray that you'd find your way back to your family. The words landed harder than I expected, not because strangers had believed them, but because people I respected, people who had known me for years, had been quietly praying over a problem that had never actually existed, at least not in the way Marcus described it. He hadn't just lied to me. He had spent months quietly lying about me, rewriting the story of our marriage into one where I was the absent, distracted party and he was the patient, long-suffering husband holding everything together alone. Later, buried in a sworn financial statement filed months earlier for a business loan, Linda found a sentence that confirmed it in writing. My wife is frequently absent due to military obligations and has effectively abandoned the marital relationship. I had deployed exactly once in the 9 years we'd been married, for a total of 7 months. I had never abandoned anything. But by the time this document was filed, he had already built a version of events sturdy enough to survive scrutiny from a loan officer, a mother, a pastor, and apparently, eventually, a court. The hearing itself took place on a Wednesday morning in early autumn, in a courtroom that smelled faintly of old carpet and coffee from the machine down the hall. I wore my dress uniform, not to impress anyone, but because it represented something Marcus's story had spent months quietly trying to dismantle: my integrity, my competence, the idea that showing up and doing hard things reliably actually meant something. Dolores testified first, plainly and without exaggeration, exactly as she'd always done everything in our home. When Marcus's attorney tried to suggest she might have misread an innocent visit from an old friend, she only said, "I have cleaned that house every week for 9 years. I know the difference between a friend and what I saw that day." A few people in the gallery smiled. Even the judge's expression softened, just slightly. Danielle testified next, admitting the affair without excusing herself, describing the version of events Marcus had fed her: a finalized divorce, a wife who'd supposedly already moved on, a wedding ring he claimed to keep on only for professional appearances. Then Linda introduced the financial records, the property transfers, the renovation invoices, the security footage, laid out in careful chronological order until the pattern was impossible to argue with. It wasn't dramatic testimony so much as methodical documentation, one piece after another, and somehow that made it more damning than any single dramatic confrontation could have been. The judge didn't rule that day. She recessed for lunch and returned at 1:30 with her decision already written out in front of her. "The court finds clear evidence," she said, "that Mr. Ellis intentionally concealed marital assets, misrepresented financial information to this court and to lending institutions, and transferred jointly owned property in anticipation of divorce proceedings." She looked up, briefly, toward Marcus. "The transfer of the lake property for $1 is declared a fraudulent conveyance and will revert to the marital estate pending final distribution." The ruling continued for nearly 20 minutes, addressing each hidden transaction in turn. I was awarded the marital home. Marcus was ordered to repay the missing investment funds, including what had gone into renovating a cabin he no longer legally owned, and to cover a substantial share of my legal fees given what the judge dryly called a pattern of dishonesty that went well beyond the ordinary breakdown of a marriage. Before we left the courtroom, the judge added one more thing, looking directly at Marcus. "Marriages end for all kinds of reasons, and that alone is never anyone's fault to be punished for. Dishonesty, however, is what turned this into something far more serious than an ordinary divorce." No one in the room said anything. Not even Marcus. Outside the courthouse, the late summer heat hit like a wall. Marcus walked quickly toward the parking lot without a word to anyone. His mother called after him once and then fell silent when he didn't turn around. I drove Dolores home myself that evening, both of us mostly quiet, the radio playing low. When I dropped her off, she hugged me for a long moment before stepping out of the car. "How did everything go?" she asked, though I think she already knew from my face. "The truth won today," I told her, and she smiled the kind of smile that told me she understood exactly what that had cost both of us to get to. In the months that followed, I paid off the remaining balance on her car, a small thing, really, compared to what her one difficult phone call had given me back. A chance to stop living inside someone else's carefully constructed story a single day longer than I already had. 6 months after the ruling, I drove out to the airport to pick up my sister for the holidays, the same stretch of highway I'd pulled off of the day everything changed, the same rolling hills passing by outside the window. Only this time my hands weren't shaking on the wheel. The drive no longer reminded me of the worst afternoon of my life. It just felt, finally, like an ordinary Tuesday. I still serve. I still get up before sunrise most mornings, still drink bad coffee out of a mug that says something ridiculous, still spend my days solving other people's logistics problems instead of my own. It isn't glamorous work, but it's honest, and after everything that happened, honest felt like something worth holding onto with both hands. Dolores still works for me, though these days I think of her less as staff and more as family. She still insists on bringing something homemade every Christmas Eve. I still pretend to argue about letting her do it. She still ignores me entirely. Some traditions, it turns out, are worth keeping exactly as they are. As for Marcus, I stopped keeping track of his life somewhere along the way, not because I'd forgiven him, but because I simply no longer needed to know. I heard, secondhand and without much interest, that his business lost a number of longtime clients once the divorce became public record, and that the lake house eventually sold to someone else entirely. Whether he found whatever he'd been looking for after all of it, I honestly couldn't tell you. And for the first time in a long while, that didn't bother me at all. That wasn't bitterness. It was just freedom, plain and unremarkable, the kind that doesn't announce itself so much as it simply settles in and stays. Some Saturdays now, I volunteer with a small support group for military spouses going through something similar. I don't stand at the front pretending to have all the answers. I just tell my story, the same way I've told it here, and sometimes we laugh, and sometimes we sit quietly together because there isn't much left to say that needs saying out loud. One afternoon, a woman about my age stayed behind after the meeting and asked, quietly, "How did you stop wanting to get even with him?" I thought about that for a moment before I answered. I didn't set out to get even, I told her. I just wanted the truth to matter more than his version of it. Once it did, I found I didn't need to carry the anger around anymore. It had already done its job. She nodded slowly, like she understood exactly what I meant, and I think, in the end, she did. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't quite see clearly that afternoon in the feed store parking lot, when Dolores told me not to go home. That phone call didn't destroy my life. It simply stopped me from losing any more of it to a story that was never true to begin with. Sometimes the hardest moment of your life turns out to be the one that quietly sets you free, you just don't always recognize it as that until much later, looking back at it from somewhere safer. If you've ever had a moment when the truth changed the direction of everything, I'd love to hear about it. Take care of yourselves, and never underestimate the quiet strength it takes to choose honesty over anger, even when anger would be so much easier.